What I'm looking for in a bank is one that's looking out for me, like NBT. I want a relationship and a team that supports me in my dreams. And when life gets challenging, I need a bank that's focused on what matters. Not to mention one that's been top rated by Forbes in trust, customer service, financial advice, and more. That's why when it comes to meeting my banking needs, it's always NBT. Learn more at nbtbank.com. Member FDIC Equal Housing Lender.
Welcome and thanks for tuning in. This is Tom Hickey from 2020 Media, and you are listening to NBT Bank's On the Scene podcast. Reach over 250,000 readers of the Southern New England Jewish Ledger, weha.com, and West Hartford Magazine, live 24/7, 365. Thank you for joining us, and remember to support not only our guests, but our presenting sponsor, NBT Bank. Be safe, be well.
Thanks for the introduction, Tom. This is Bob Carr with weha.com. That's we-ha.com. Tom, he didn't mention this. He is the publisher of West Hartford Magazine, the Jewish Ledger. He also brings to West Hartford the best of West Hartford and the various tastes of West Hartford. He is also a partner in weha.com with Kosik Makati and Ronnie Newton, who is our guest today. Ronnie is the editor of weha.com, and glad to have you here, Ronnie.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Tom.
Good to hear from you. Bob, I don't know if you want me to jump in there, but one of the things that I just said this to Bob and Ronnie before we started, I hit the record button, but I always say to people, if you want to know what's going on in West Hartford, just read Business Buzz, every Monday, and you'll know. So that's sort of, what we wanted to focus on today. And it just happens to be that we are recording this the day after Kristen Gorski gave a great presentation.
Yeah, so Ronnie, just kind of fill us in. Can you fill us in on what happened yesterday at the Pond House and Kristen's remarks and stuff?
Right. Well, it was so the annual economic update. Actually, it used to be in the spring, and then it kind of went on hiatus for a little bit during COVID, but came back to an in-person event last year, and now it's in the fall, which is really kind of a good time to do it. And what the economic development update is, it's a luncheon that is sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. Yesterday it was at the Pond House and it was sold out. It's always sold out because people in the business community and residents are always really anxious to know the latest and greatest business news about West Hartford. But what Kristen and what her department does is they really summarize what has happened in business in West Hartford over the past year. Of course, it's focused on the positive, but things are largely positive. And each year they divide it up or structure the presentation in a different way. This particular presentation had the Why Choose West Hartford as kind of the overriding theme. And then there were 9 different reasons why businesses would choose to open or expand in West Hartford. And she went through that and kind of went through all the different neighborhoods and the construction that's going on right now, as well as the new businesses opening, expanding. There are restaurants, there's retailers, there's a lot of multifamily residential development, and some of that is mixed use. Actually, a lot of it is mixed use as well, with commercial on the ground floor or incorporated into the development in some way.
So you wrote an article about that. I just read it, looking at it this morning. And what's the name of the article if people are looking for it on weha.com?
So it's under the business and government tab on the weha.com website. It's called Why Choose West Hartford? Economic Development Coordinator highlights a multitude of reasons. And the presentation itself was about an hour long, so I won't sit here and read it to you because that would take more than the time we have allotted, or that you wouldn't want to listen to me do that anyway. But it really was really interesting.
Podcast would be there'd be car crashes. Yeah, it's like,
Right. So, from what's the highlights? Well, for you, what were the highlights yesterday?
Yeah. Well, in fact, I should add that it was so thorough that there was only one question asked at the end, and probably not surprisingly, I was the one who asked that question. And it was because there were so many mentions of different residential units under construction that I just couldn't bear the thought of having to add them all up myself. So I did ask Kristen, you know, with everything that's going on with the new buildings that have been completed, with the things that have been approved but haven't started yet, with buildings that are under construction, and with things that are being proposed, how many residential units are coming to West Hartford in the near future? And the answer was roughly 1,500.
Wow.
So that's a pretty big expansion for the town. And while people kind of worry about that a little bit, you know, that we're growing too big, West Hartford's population has been pretty much stagnant over stagnant is probably a word that has negative connotations, but it hasn't really increased that much. In fact, I think it's actually a little lower than it was in, you know, the early days of the baby boom, when people were having a lot of children and there were a lot more people living in each household than there are now. But and one of the worries that people have, oh my goodness, we're getting all these extra residents in town, our schools are going to be bursting. The school population has also decreased, and that's a cyclical thing based on, you know, the birth rate. And right now it's in a decline just because they're really in this part of the generation, not as many babies being born. So there's actually capacity in most of the schools for the additional residents, and a lot of people coming to live in apartments don't necessarily have large families. There may be some children, one or two in each household, but you're not looking at, you know, large households living in, for the most part, in these multifamily units. So that said, the main reason, or the first reason that Kristen Gorski, the economic development coordinator, gave in her presentation, the reason why businesses are choosing West Hartford, or why anyone's choosing West Hartford, is unprecedented levels of investment. And what she meant by that was actually the purchases or sale and purchases of some really large parcels in town. And over the past year, two in Bishop's Corner that she noted were the shopping center where Big Y is located was purchased by the company that owns Big Y, and they spent $22.4 million on that property. And then diagonally across the street in the shopping center in Bishop's Corner that was owned by Eden's, and we call it Bishop's Corner West. I'm not sure what the actual name of it is, but where Target's located and Marshall's Home Goods. First National Realty purchased that for about $76 million. So that's a huge investment in the town. And then this one might not sound as much, but it's a pretty small parcel. The land that Kingswood Oxford owned that had been occupied by the Children's Museum for decades was purchased by Continental Properties for more than $10 million. And it's only 3.4 acres. So the cost per acre there is really pretty high. And that project is now, while the Big Y and the Target shopping centers aren't really undergoing much change, at least not at this point, the Children's Museum has now been demolished, and site clearing is going on now, and the work on that project is well underway.
That's more rental units and more retail. Is that what's going on there?
So that one's going to be primarily rental. It is, let me find it real quick. I believe it's a 6-story, 172 unit apartment building on the site. It's actually one building that's like S-shaped to fit on the site. It's forward to the street. So the developer spent a lot of time working with the town council and with the Design Review Advisory Committee, which is DRAC, and the Town Plan and Zoning Commission on kind of the placement of that building to keep it, to the extent possible, buffered from the neighbors behind it, especially. To one side is Kingswood, to the other side is the Hampshire House condominium, but behind it is a residential street. So it's as close to Trout Brook as it can be. And on the ground floor, there's going to be some sort of commercial occupancy, cafe or something like that. I don't believe there's any tenant identified yet. But I can't tell you when it's going to be completed, but I'm sure it's going to be at least, 18 months to 2 years before it's complete.
I have a question for Tom. You lived here all your life. You lived in West Hartford all your life.
Yeah.
And so what the changes that you're seeing? I mean, it's got to be, you have a better perspective, a more perspective than Ronnie, or certainly I would. And what's your opinion and thoughts about the growth of the town and the changes in the town and et cetera?
I'm asked that all the time, you guys, and especially since last spring, our real estate agent convinced my wife and I to sell our home, which she said, "Oh, don't worry, it will." You've got plenty of time. It will take 2 or 3 months, and 48 hours later, the house was sold, and the new buyers wanted us out. But so be careful what you wish for. But I I was in Ronnie's neighborhood. I moved basically 2 miles down the street, so renting instead of owning at this point. So it's just a different perspective at this time in my life. But one of the things that I say to people all the time is I feel as though, which I think it should be this way, you guys tell me if you don't agree, I feel as though West Hartford is being built and developed for the future, not to keep people like me happy, who can remember when, I don't know, what were some of the things, Ronnie, that you probably hear about, when leaves were picked up in front of your house, when the little garbage carts came around the back of your house and you didn't have to bring your garbage cans out to the front, and all these changes. Well, those were things that made sense, a decade or 2 or 3 ago, but not today. And when you have people, I watch the people who have even moved into my neighborhood, it's different from the way that it was many years ago. What would you call it? The friendliness, the openness of the neighbors. It's still there. People get to know each other, but I always joke and say the first thing they do is fix their garage door openers, so they can open it, pull their car in and close it before they get out, so they could just go about their business, in their house. But I think it's just a different mindset. People, both people in the house are working, they're tired, they get home, they just want to, focus on, themselves or their family unit. So I just think, Bob, it's positioned and being built and developed for sort of the next generation, as I think it should be, because let's face it, our generation's not going to be here, in all of it. So, why do you want, you don't want to necessarily, upset them, but there's just a lot that I think as an individual you have to think of. One of the things that made a big difference for me, and Ronnie will know what I'm talking about, and maybe some of our listeners, but there was a funeral home in our neighborhood that was on the corner of what is it? Main Street and Park Road,
Yeah, it's Park in South Main. Yeah.
Park in South Main. And Hartford Healthcare, bought it and built an office complex or a building there, as they're doing in so many different locations, throughout our area. And, to me, it was just too big, but I remember when CVS was Frank's supermarket, and I used to walk there, to buy a gallon of milk, a little bit. So again, it wasn't, Hartford Healthcare wasn't putting it there for me, they were putting it there for, the future, homeowners and families that were going to live in that area, in that marketplace. And I think that's fine. And having spent so much time this past summer with my son and his wife, the whole world has changed. I've never even used Instacart before, and I didn't know what it was. They're best friends with the Instacart lady. I mean, it's like, they don't go anywhere. It's just like, it's really sort of funny. But again, that's a whole different psyche. And that probably is a lot of what Kristen spoke about yesterday too, Ronnie, where, business is changing, just the way that people function and operate. It's all so different.
But I think that's something that the town as a whole, and I know there's a lot, I'm personally often resistant to change. Bob, don't laugh too hard. and and nostalgic for things of the past, but I'll steal one of the comments that that Mayor Sherry Cantor makes often, which is, if you're not moving forward, you're standing still. So, or if you're standing still, you're moving backwards. It's something like that. Here now, I'm messing up the quote, but in any case, I do feel like West Hartford has changed, but it needs to. You really can't stand still because things get old, they get tired. The house I live in is almost 100 years old, and just thinking about when I was a kid, and if I thought about a 100-year-old house back then, it would have been, a colonial, like a true colonial from the Revolutionary War. But in any case, evolution is necessary, and it's necessary to keep on top of things. You can't, you think about the changes in technology that have happened in our lifetimes, and it's remarkable. And when you look at the economics of running a town and developing a town, you really need to look at it towards the future and have that eye to the future. And I think while residents do tend to be nostalgic for what was, kind of a smaller, sleepier town, a town with a lot of retail in the center, more so than restaurants. If we could have kept that up, if the, population would have decided not to use Instacart or, Amazon,
yeah,
well, then that could have been successful, but it can't, because things are not within our control to keep at a certain level. So we need to keep looking towards the future. And I do think that West Hartford is being thoughtful about it. And you also have to look at the economics of running a large town. We're still a town. We're not officially a city, but we're the largest town in New England, and with, population of roughly 65,000. But, the expense of having, I couldn't believe when I first visited West Hartford when I was dating my husband, I observed those little carts from the trash company going into his backyard or down his driveway to pick up the trash cans. And coming from Stamford, where we didn't have that, I could not believe something like that existed.
yeah.
But think of, doing that now, it would just be so expensive, and all everybody would do was complain about the high tax rate.
Mhm.
You really need to look at the cost benefit analysis when you make economic decisions. And I do think that the town has strong management, and they're really looking carefully at that. And when I see people say, oh my gosh, the Yukon property, it should be a park. Well, gosh, that would be wonderful, but that would be such an expense for the town if the town had bought it, to tear it down and remediate the property and then operate it as a park where it's a drain on the tax base and not giving any money back. And yes, I know maybe Blueback Square wasn't the, silver bullet that caused taxes to go down in town. But had it not been built, and had that land been still, lying fallow and vacant, what would our tax rate be now? Maybe it didn't go down, but it certainly has added to the grand list. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. And, maybe it's my education in economics and political science and looking at American government and even working from a risk management consultant perspective on looking at state and urban finance and working with governmental and non-governmental or quasi-governmental agencies that I have that perspective. But I think a lot of people lose sight of that.
And there's very little, as I remember, there's very little buildable space in West Hartford. So the fact that they're getting 1,500 new units, that's pretty cool. But there's very little buildable housing space left in the town. Am I correct about that? Like single family home kind of building?
There's very little. There's a new development going up on Tunxus Road. It's really, people think it's actually in Farmington, but I believe it's like 6 or 8 homes. That's one of the few plots of land that's really available for single family development. The Yukon property is in a residential zone. It's roughly 58 acres. About half of it is either wetlands or uplands, meaning it's, a land that would drain into the wetlands. So it's a very kind of fragile environment. But while it would be, great from a lot of people's perspective to have that be completely single family, a developer is not going to develop it just out of the goodness of their heart. It needs to be economically viable for a developer to purchase the property, to clean it up and to build on it, and then to operate their business either by selling properties or leasing them, or whatever they're going to do with it. And I remember when the initial discussions, and I've been writing about the UConn campus for a decade now, when those discussions first came up, there was a lot of analysis done by the town, even, what could it be used for? And the economics of building single family homes there, it just doesn't work. There's just, it's not, it can't be profitable.
Right. I like what Tom was saying there about being built for the next generation. I thought that was a really cool statement. And then I think that's something we getting a little philosophical here. Having just traveled the country by car over 5 weeks, you see so much growth everywhere else except New England. I mean, I lived in Connecticut for 40 years, and basically the population changed very little in that 40 years. The towns don't change, which is lovely if you live there, but there's very little growth, where West Hartford seemed to have changed that dynamic, which is great. We're not building, I live in Rhode Island, we don't build for the next generation here either. So I think that's a great statement.
Well,
long term,
Ronnie, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Ronnie, you might agree with me on this. Right in our neighborhood, we don't say where it was, but directly across the street from me, or diagonally across the street from me, sort of in Ronnie's backyard, it's just one street over. I can't remember what it's called, but someone bought the land, bought the property, bought a house, and knocked it down, and built, a modern, green, efficient home, that was there. Well, by the time they were done, bought the first house, knocked it down, built the new house, they had to spend $1 million, and I joke all the time and say, oh my goodness, if I had $1 million, I wouldn't necessarily build in my neighborhood, I would go somewhere else, whatever. But to them, they wanted the convenience of West Hartford and our location, and and the whole bit, and it didn't matter. But again, that was being built for them, and they wanted brand new, and they wanted green, and they wanted a little bit, and that's just that's what it is. So it's you're trying.
I can literally look out my window from where I'm sitting at my computer right now, and I can see that house.
Can you see it? Yeah,
literally in my backyard, yeah. And it is a beautiful home, and it was a tear down, is I think the term you were looking for, of a small, 1940s or 1950s ranch house that was there before, and now it's a nice new modern, probably 2.5 story colonial, much bigger footprint that still fits on the property. But this is not really a neighborhood of true. I mean, there's some bigger homes here, but it's not one of the most expensive neighborhoods in town, and it's not $1 million. Well, now everything's $1 million home neighborhood, but exactly. It wasn't at the time.
Yeah. And then the other thing you made me think of too earlier, Ronnie, when you were talking about the town and development and all that, I remember, and I don't know what made me think of this, but years ago when we were looking at colleges for my son, I remember this one school visit that we went on, and the head of the college came out to speak, and he said, my wife and I were sort of, not appalled, but just there was a lot of construction going on, on this campus. And he basically said what Sherry says about the town of West Hartford now. He said, I just want to, give you some words of wisdom. If you go to a campus and there is no construction, there are no vehicles, there's nothing's being done, that's exactly the future of that university or of that college. There's just nothing going on. No one's looking to the future. No one's planning. And my son ended up going there, with all the construction of it, but never once complained, because they were all improvements that meant a better life for them, as far as living there. So I think that's true about West Hartford too.
So,
So
well,
Brianna,
we've gotten
yeah.
way off track for,
Yeah.
kind of
Sure
like
did. How'd that happen?
Well, it's part
Because-
of the conversation, right? It's part of what we're trying to do here
Yeah.
is make it a conversation as opposed to the question and answer. So what were you saying?
Well, I was going to say, do you think, do you want to have any summaries, a couple more kind of summary items from the economic
Sure.
development update yesterday?
Absolutely.
Well, like I said, what did you pull out of there that was surprising to you or you thought was really important that doesn't get noticed enough?
Well, I think one thing that's important to note is that development really is in every corner of town, and every type of development pretty much is in every corner of town. And that includes the development of affordable housing, or, really buildings that are primarily affordable. There's one that's on the table in Bishop's Corner that I would think is highly likely is going to get passed, and it's called the L, and it's a former synagogue that's been vacant for a long time that the Troutbrook Realty, which is the development arm of the West Hartford Housing Authority, is looking to turn into affordable housing, and that's going to be 49 units. And then there's one that's being done in West Hartford Center, which is the West Hartford Inn and the former Los Imperios restaurant / nightclub. And then there's some in Elmwood also, which is where more of the affordable housing has traditionally been. But it's, it's really kind of spread out all around town. You've got retail, like a lot of updates in the Corbin's Corner, Corbin Collection area that have been taking place. Our House, which is a furniture and decor store, is opening this week in West Farms. It's in the West Hartford part of West Farms. I can't wait to check that out. They did some really incredible improvements to the facade, which are visible from New Britain Avenue. We've got restaurants, but they're spread out all over town. And, West Hartford's been known as a, foodie town, and that continues to be part of the town's character. But there've been some really cool restaurants. I keep thinking we've run out of concepts, but that's actually not true. We've got Les Maisettes, which just opened in the center, and it's French country cooking. We've got Boqueria, which just opened this week, and it's like kind of upscale Spanish tapas, really excellent food. And there's more opening all over town, and businesses that are also opening a second location. They're either choosing West Hartford or opening to expand from another town, or opening another location within town. So I think those are just really positive things that were highlighted in the update yesterday.
So really what we should do is, Ronnie, is you should just tell people again, if you don't mind repeating it, for where do they go on the weha.com website, and exactly how can they read your update on Kristen's report?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So it's dated October 17th, and the article is entitled "Why Choose West Hartford? Economic Development Coordinator Highlights a Multitude of Reasons." And it's kind of long, but I broke it up with subheadings so that you can focus on the part of the presentation that you're most interested in. And, every week, every Monday morning, Business Buzz highlights our newsletter, and I try to start it with a little bit of a surprise. Can't always find that. Sometimes it's a slow week, and there's kind of a lull of when things are opening, but this tends to be a pretty busy time of the year. So I think we'll see a lot of exciting news coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Great.
Awesome.
And Bob, I would love to add that not only is the On the Scene podcast sponsored by NBT Bank, but also weha.com's Business Buzz, is sponsored by NBT Bank as well.
Yeah, thank you very much to
Absolutely.
NBT for that financial support.
It's great. Very good. Should we sign off then, Bob?
Absolutely. That sounds like a
Let's
good
do
way to end
it.
the
All right,
show.
great. Well, again, this has been Tom Hickey, Bob Carr, and Ronnie Newton on the scene talking about development in West Hartford. We reach through our On the Scene podcast, over 250,000 readers of the Southern New England Jewish Ledger, weha.com, and West Hartford Magazine, 24/7, 365. And again, remember, please, to not only thank our guests or acknowledge them when you see them. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, just direct them to us through weha.com is fine, and just send it to Ronnie. She'll answer for us or let us know. And again, special thanks to our presenting sponsor, NBT Bank. In the meantime, be safe and be well, and we'll see you next time on The Scene.
Thanks so much.
What I'm looking for in a bank is one that's looking out for me, like NBT. I want a relationship and a team that supports me in my dreams. And when life gets challenging, I need a bank that's focused on what matters. Not to mention one that's been top rated by Forbes in trust, customer service, financial advice, and more. That's why when it comes to meeting my banking needs, it's always NBT. Learn more at nbtbank.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.